So we've all seen those highly aesthetic videos on social media about like renovation diaries and DIYing it through getting a fixer-upper house and smashing out some drywall, putting on your overalls and painting a little bit here and there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what the DIY renovation fixer-upper project looks like here in Switzerland, because it's a very different scenario here versus other countries. So let's get into it. So Switzerland is one of the most highly regulated and expensive markets to renovate and build in. So that's not just in terms of the materials, but also obviously in terms of labor. And not only is it expensive, but you aren't just allowed to do whatever you want to your house, even if you own it. And in terms of buying an older home here, which is normally a home that was built anywhere between the 1950s to 80s, but I would even consider a home built in the 90s as kind of older now, because you are looking at replacing some of the sort of crucial systems or roofs or things like that in the next decade or two. So basically, Housey, which is a real estate platform here in Switzerland, estimates that a full professional structural overhaul of a house in Switzerland would cost anywhere between 1,500 to 3,000 francs per square meter. So if you're buying a home that is about 150 square meters, that would be between a quarter to 500,000 francs just for the renovation. And I'm just going to walk through the different bigger costs when you're looking at renovating a house. And this is just maybe before we get started, this is not to say that you shouldn't under any circumstances buy an older property and do the fixer-upper thing, but it's more so to shed light on how much of a discount you should actually be getting, because I am constantly plowing through different listings here on the different platforms like HomeGate and things like that. And often I see wildly exaggerated asking prices for properties that are very old and haven't been invested into for decades. So that's sort of my core motivation for making this video, because we have also viewed tons of properties like this before moving into our current home, which is basically tear down, new build. So we have the old foundation and then the upper floors are built completely new. So I just wanted to give that kind of background or context to the video before getting started. So let's dive right into the different items. So first, let's start with the kitchen. So some market data that I've looked at basically shows a pretty wide range for the costs of kitchen renovations. So it can range anywhere from 5 to like 80 grand and beyond. I mean, if you get some very fancy countertops made of some amazing marble, that alone could run you up like 100 grand. But in terms of the budget tier, so if you're looking at just replacing cabinetry, but not actually replacing any appliances or making any layout changes, you could probably get away with spending probably even less than 5 grand. If you source all of the cabinetry and whatever you want to replace from a more cosmetic perspective from elsewhere, and if you do everything yourself, you could probably do it for even less money than that. The thing is that when you're buying an older property, 9 times out of 10, you will actually need a full kitchen renovation. Most of the time, what I've seen here is like kitchens are from the 70s and haven't been renovated, and you have to basically overhaul the entire thing. And that sort of mid-range where you're making structural changes to the actual layout of the kitchen, that would probably cost you around $50,000. And then obviously the premium tier we already discussed. If you want anything special in terms of materials and things like that, that is going to cost a lot more. So here in Switzerland, you do have to demonstrate that you've used professionals with credentials and things like that. And you can't just bring in your own crew from a cheaper country. That is not going to be possible here. You can't pay someone cash in hand to do a little bit of work on your kitchen. That sort of thing does not work in this country at all. And this is why you have to be aware of the true costs of these sorts of major renovations. So if you've been watching some HGTV and I don't know, you're on like renovation, DIY, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and feel inspired, then please bear that in mind, because you really can do those things from a cosmetic point of view, but things like kitchens and bathrooms are going to cost you a lot. So let's move on to the next item. So the next big item, you probably guessed, would be bathrooms. And just to mention, before we get started on the prices, any wet rooms are usually going to cost you a lot more than you'd think. And you might expect them to cost less than kitchens, and they just don't. More often than not, you have to make major changes to bathrooms that require a lot of different professional labor, and that is what is going to cost you. So Housey, again, this real estate platform, estimates that the cost of renovating bathrooms can be anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 per square meter, depending on how much you're getting done. But if you think about whether the bathroom has a radiator, for example, you'd then have to have floor heating installed and probably replace the bathtub and the sink and the toilet and whatnot. And all of this, even for a non-premium version of a bathroom renovation, would likely cost you around 50,000 francs easily. And here we're really not looking at, some kind of fancy bathroom coated in Carrara marble. I'm just talking about really bringing old 1970s bathroom up to modern standards. If you've seen rental apartments here in Zurich and probably elsewhere in Switzerland too, they're almost never renovated. And this is the reason. It's so expensive. And, if you're a landlord, it's probably not worth it for you. So this is one of the most shocking prices for me, because I personally expected for bathroom renovations to be a lot less than a kitchen renovation would be, but it's not necessarily the case. Then the other huge expense that you would be looking at if you buy an older home is the energy and heating overhaul. So basically, these old fossil fuel-based systems are kind of being phased out, but all of these older homes will probably come with an old oil or gas boiler, and to replace this with an air-to-water heat pump, you are looking at a cost of between $32,000 to 48,000 francs. And if you're looking to replace this with a geothermal earth probe heat pump, you're looking at anywhere between 55 to 80,000 francs. And this is the one we have. Thankfully, everything was replaced, even though this house is built on top of an old existing structure, or foundation rather. All of these systems were replaced with these new state-of-the-art systems when it was renovated and built. So, for example, if you wanted to replace the old system with this geothermal heat pump, it requires specialized probe drilling, and this is basically what is going to cost you so much. And these are quite obviously not things that you can even participate in. You just have to pay this, and sometimes you can recoup some of those costs after replacing these systems, these old fossil fuel systems with newer ones, but you have to stomach the cost up front. And as far as I've looked into it, you wouldn't get the majority of the money back. So this is definitely something to bear in mind when buying an older home here. And the last item that I wanted to include on this list, because I think it's also an unexpected one, is windows. So Housey once again estimates that per unit, replacing windows will cost you about 600 to 850 francs. So for, let's say, a 15 window house, that's easily between 12 to 15,000 francs. And when you want to add things like soundproofing and tilt and turn hardware and things like that, the price starts to climb. But that is definitely a cost to bear in mind. Like I mentioned in my previous video, windows, in my opinion, are a really good investment. Having proper windows means less heat loss and heat gain. So the more heat waves we start having here in Europe and the colder our winters become, the more important that is going to be on the long run, so that your energy expenditure, and if you're replacing really expensive heating systems so that you make full use of that money, it does make sense to also invest in the windows. Now, the reason that you can't really do a lot of the work yourself here in Switzerland, if you're looking into a fixer-upper property, is because you do require sign-off for any sort of structural changes, plumbing, electricals, things like that, from a licensed technician. And all of these go into, so let's say you sell your home, there's a binder in which you have all of these details, and this is all overseen by the notary. So you can't just put together some kind of file with your own work and your own DIY projects from the weekends. It doesn't work like that here. And this is what really runs up the costs. And the second thing to bear in mind is that unless you're financing all these projects in cash by yourself, you would need to be approved for Bau credit or construction loan. And in order to get approved for one of these loans, you would need to have official quotes from certified technicians. So it's a highly enforced, very difficult environment to do things yourself, other than painting walls. But usually, if you're buying a 1970s home, you have to do a lot more than that. And the final point to bear in mind here is that you will need to remove a ton of asbestos. It's in all of these old homes. And so if you have to tear down any walls, which you would have to do most of the time. If you're renovating a bathroom or a kitchen, that's going to be an additional cost and just inconvenience to deal with. So that's a major one. I mean, when our house was being constructed, there was a truck that they were putting all of the asbestos into and taking it out. And obviously, it's also dangerous to be around that sort of thing. So once these sorts of renovations are taking place, you might not be able to live in the property. So then that's another cost, right? So if you have to move out and rent something while your kitchen or bathroom is being renovated, that is a cost that you should add to the overall estimate that you have for fixing up the property. So if you are looking at different listings and you see one of these older fixer-upper type properties, how do you assess how it stacks up to a brand new turnkey property? So firstly, you definitely need to hire an expert. You need to do a professional audit of the property and have an estimate of how much the overhaul of the property would cost you. Then you need to get an expert report based on that audit and ideally have quotes so that you can base your decision on more than a hunch. And thirdly, you are taking on risk that you wouldn't be taking on buying a brand new turnkey property. That includes, warranties for all the systems that have been installed. So that also should come with a discount. So I would use all of these three sort of pillars to guide you to find the correct price. And I find that the bidding process here is very opaque. It's basically blind bidding, and you don't have a system like Zillow in the US where you can actually see how much the property has, easily you would be able to see how much the property has historically sold for over time. You do have the right to find out this information through the notary, but it's more difficult. So what I would do is just follow those three pillars, make sure that you come in at a reasonable bid, and you should also know that you could be taking on risks that you're not aware of, and sometimes that are undisclosed. And I guess the final point is that litigation in this country is extremely expensive. So if you do discover an undisclosed issue with the property, trying to get the seller to remedy that is also going to cost you a lot. So these are all things that you really have to know if you want to buy an older property in Switzerland. So I just wanted to end with my closing thoughts and my personal opinion. We were looking at two homes that were exactly the same price, this one and another home that was actually further away from the city, also in the Zurich Oberland, and that one was built in 1990, which initially seems like it's not an older house, but it's actually, it's getting there. It's almost a 40-year-old property. So one of the bathrooms was horrendous. The other one had sort of been renovated, but quite a long time ago. The kitchen was also not very modern, and we hadn't even looked into anything else with a professional. So just the kind of initial gut feeling of how is this being listed at the same exact price as a brand new property? And this is incredibly common here. And I don't think it's worth buying an older property in this country unless you get a significant discount. You have no idea what you're buying in terms of risk and in terms of structural damage and things like that. And those are such insane costs in this country that I personally do not think it's worth the risk. The only way that you should take on a risk like that is if you actually bid at a decent discount, and a discount that includes like the inconvenience and stress. Because let's face it, like moving into a brand new property versus moving into an older property where you have significant amounts of work to do, it's a lot more stressful. So those are just some things that I would bear in mind, because none of these people are really going to have your back here. Like the real estate agent obviously represents the seller. Banks also will usually just value the property as it's been valued, at least from my experience. So you really do need to involve experts so that you get an accurate estimate of the true price of that property. So I hope you enjoyed. I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you have bought an older home in Switzerland and if you encountered any issues. With that final thought, I will say that you can even encounter issues with newer homes. So please don't think that buying a newer home is completely risk-free. Buying a home is always involves some level of risk. But yes, I will finish off here. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye.